Hello, class. So I got a couple good responses to the ed puzzle that we did on Friday, so I think I'm going to continue with that. It's a great way to make sure that you are doing your notes and that you are doing the homework. So, and I'm sure you guys all heard the sad news that we are not going back to school this year, so it's really a bummer, and I can't believe this is actually happening. So, continuing on though, with the radical equations. So on Friday when we were doing the radical equations, I only gave you problems that had one radical in them. So that first step was to isolate the radical. All right, so once you isolated it, then you could square root and get rid of your radical. Well, what if you have more than one radical? All right, well, we still need to get rid of those roots. It's square root, so we would want to square them so that we get rid of it. But the problem is that when you're doing problems like these, you have to square entire sides. All right, so which means that you would have to square this side and square this side. And what does that mean? That means you have to take the square root of x minus 10 plus square root of x times square root of x minus 10 plus square root of x. Okay, that would be kind of tedious. So there is a way that we can do this that's a little bit easier. All right, so what we're going to do actually is now get the radicals on opposite sides of each other. Okay, I promise that it is easier to do it that way. So we're going to subtract the square root of x to the other side. So when I do that, I end up with the square root of x minus 10 equals 1 minus the square root of x. All right, now I still want to square both sides, so I get rid of that radical. But once again, I need to square the entire side. So that means that I'm going to end up with x minus 10. Great, that's easy. Okay, but this I'm going to have to take 1 minus the square root of x times 1 minus the square root of x. Like, that's not any easier. I promise you, it is easier than if you tried to square here. It's a little bit more tedious if you try to just square both sides and distribute there. Okay, so we are going to distribute. So 1 times 1, 1 times the negative x times 1, negative x times the negative square root of x times the negative square root of x. So I end up with x minus 10 equals 1 minus 1 square root of x minus 1 square root of x plus, because I'm taking a negative square root of x times a negative square root of x. That's why it's going to be a plus, because you have a negative times a negative. What's square root of x times square root of x? It's the square root of x squared. What's the square root of x squared? X. All right, now I have a problem like I did on Friday. Okay, I'm going to want to clean this up a little bit. So I am going to have x minus 10 equals 1 minus 2 square root of x plus x. Now the reason it's like Friday is because I have one radical. What's the rule? Isolate the radical. So I'm going to subtract 1. I'm going to subtract x. So subtract x, subtract 1, subtract 1, subtract x. Okay, that cancels those. Here I end up with 11 equals a negative 2, or that's a negative 11, excuse me, a negative 2 square root of x. I need to divide by negative 2. So negative 11 divided by negative 2 is 11 halves equals the square root of x. And now I square both sides, square this, square this. So that gives me x equals a 121 over 4. Okay, what do we have to do next? Check your answer. So we plug this in. Square root of 121 over 4 minus 10 plus square root of 121 over 4 equals 1. All right, I'm going to just use my calculator here. Okay, so I'm going to take 121 divided by 4 minus 10. And what that gives me is 4.5. So 120 square root of 121 minus 10 is actually 20.5. So this gives me 4.5. And then the square root of 121 over 4, so square root of 121 divided by 4, does give me 5.5. That equals 1? Huh? How's that possible? So this is actually equal to 10. 10 doesn't equal 1. Oh, okay. Well, you know what? False answer. So my answer now is going to be no solution. All right, so I don't have a solution to that because this didn't check out. I did everything algebraically correct. It just didn't work. Okay, so make sure you check your answers. All right, let's try another one. Okay, so the x's or these roots are already on opposite sides of each other. Great, so that saves me a step. So I'm going to square both sides. Square both sides. So when I square that, a negative squared is a positive. So I actually am going to get just x minus 11 equals 3 minus the square root of x, 3 minus the square root of x. So I get x minus 11 equals 9 minus 3 square root x minus 3 square root x. And from the previous problem, we already know a negative x square root of x times a negative square root of x is just x. So that's x minus 11 equals 9 minus 6 square root x plus x. So remember the rules of addition. I didn't point that out last time, but the radicals are the same. Therefore, you only add or subtract the coefficients. That's why it's negative 6 square root of x. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 9, subtract x. So actually, the x's will cancel again. I'm going to end up with a negative 20 over here because I subtract 9 from negative 11. That's negative 20. Subtract the x's. Those cancel. Equals negative 6 square root x. Divide by a negative 6, so I get a positive 20 over 6 equals the square root of x, or that's the same thing as 10 thirds equals the square root of x. Square both sides, that gives me 100 over 9 equals x. So again, I squared that. 10 squared, 3 squared, that's 100 ninths. Okay, here's now we're going to check. So I plug that in. I get 100 ninths minus 11 equals 3 minus the square root of 100 ninths. So again, I'm just going to plug this into my calculator. 100 ninths divided by 9, or 100 ninths minus 11. Square root of that is 0.333333. That's actually a third, guys. So you end up with a negative 1/3 there. Equals 3 minus 10 thirds. And 3 minus 10 thirds is negative 1/3. Checks. So there is my answer, a 100 ninths. All right, here's the point in the video where it is now your turn. So your problem for the day, well, there's 3 problems for the day. Your problem is to do that one for your homework. All right, now what if we have exponential equations? Okay, now these are the same thing as roots. So remember, if I had x to the 2/3, that's the same thing as the third root of x squared. You are not going to have to convert these to radicals. It's actually easier if you don't. But much like the radical rules, you do need to isolate the quantity with the exponent. So the 3x plus 4 to the 2/3 need to be isolated. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to divide by 2. So I end up with 3x plus 4 to the 2/3 equals 16. Okay, well, now I can get rid of this root, or excuse me, get rid of this rational exponent if I raise it to another power, because we're trying to undo that power. Well, in order to undo that, I need this to be a 1. So how do I get this to be a 1? You're going to multiply that by the reciprocal. Okay, so I'm going to take and I have my 3x plus 4 to the 2/3, and that's 16. Well, I'm going to raise this to the 3/2 power, which means I need to raise this to the 3/2 power as well. So 2/3 times 3/2, it's 1. So that just means I have 3x plus 4. Okay, now 16 to the 3/2, that does mean that it's the square root of 16 to the 3rd power. What's the square root of 16? 4. 4 to the 3rd, 64. Okay, you actually don't need to do that either. You can use your calculators, guys. Just use your calculator. You're going to take 16, hit your little caret top thing. But you do need to have this, well, if you have the older model calculators, you need to have that in parentheses. You lucky ones with the newer calculators already have that little exponent, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just take 16 to the 3/2 power and hit enter, and you should get 64. All right, well, now it's just easy peasy from here. You're going to subtract 4 from both sides. You're going to divide by 2. And that's a weird 0. All right, so divide by 2. And you get 20. Okay, always check your answer. So you're going to plug that back in. 2, 3, what was my answer? 20. So 3 times 20 plus 4 to the 2/3, We want to make sure that that's equal to 32. 2, so that's 64 to the 2/3. Again, you should be able to just plug it into your calculator at this point. 2, 64, carrot top, 2/3. You should get 32. That one checks out. So that is your answer. Okay, let's try another one together. And then you're going to do 2 for your homework. All right, so we got this guy right here. We want to isolate. Didn't mean to highlight all that there. Go away. All right, so we're going to isolate this guy. Okay, the correct solving procedure is to first subtract 12 from both sides. So we end up with 2x minus 10 to the 3/4. That's equal to -4. Then we're going to divide by 2. So I get x minus 10 to the 3/4 equals -2. Then I'm going to raise it to the 4/3 power. Raise it to the 4/3 power. So I get x minus 10 equals, I don't know actually what the cube root of 2 to the 4th power is. It's not going to be a nice number. You know why? Because I have a typo, but that's okay. We can still solve this. All right, so I'm going to take it to -2 to the 4/3 power, and that gives me about 2.5. We'll just go with 2.52, okay, just to make it easy. 2.52 approximately, so I'm going to add 10 to both sides, and I get 12.52. Okay, don't forget to check it. All right, so we're going to plug that back in. I'm going to come over here into this work area. All right, so 2 times 12.52. Whoops, forgot my minus 10. Beep. Minus 10 to the 3/4 plus 12. We hope that equals 8. So I end up with 2 times 2.52 to the 3/4 plus 12. Does it equal 8? Okay, I'm just actually going to type it in my calculator. I'm going 2 parenthesis 2.52 parenthesis to the 3/4. Mine, I have to make sure the 3/4 is in parentheses plus 12. Oh no, I got 16. 16 doesn't equal 8. So what does this mean? No solution. All right, so your homework is to now do problem B and problem C. Okay, so your answer C, okay, so going through that, you answered part B. Okay, great, check. Okay, now go and do problem C. Okay, check. All right, so if you're confident in your answer, then you're good to go. If you want to keep watching, you can watch and I'll go back and do the problems so you can check your work. All right, but otherwise you're done for the day if you did your problem. So 13 minutes, probably a little bit, give or take. All right, so going back up here. Okay, so checking your work here. Get rid of some of this stuff. Okay, here we go. So here you go, check your work. You need to add square root of x to both sides. So I end up with x minus 5 equals -2 plus square root of x. Okay, we need to now square both sides. So we get x minus 5 equals -2 plus square root of x, -2 plus square root of x. Get x minus 5 equals positive 4, excuse me, positive 4 minus 2 square root x minus 2 square root x plus x, because again, x square root of x times square root of x is just x. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 4, subtract x, end up with a -9 equals -4 square root of x. Divide by -4, you end up with 9/4 equals the square root of x. Square both sides, you end up with x equals 81/16. Okay, and then plug it back into the calculator to check your work. And when you check, it does check out. So plug in the 81/16 and plug in 81/16 here, and it does give you a square, or it does give you -2. That one checks, so that one is a correct answer. Okay, the next two problems, if you're checking, isolate the x plus 2 to the 1/3. So you're going to subtract 3 from both sides. Gives you 12. Divide by 4. So you get x plus 2 to the 1/3 power equals 3. You're going to raise that to the reciprocal power of 3. So you end up with x plus 2 equals 27. So x equals 25. So we plug that back in. So we check it. So 25 plus 2 is 27. 27 to the 1/3 power is 3. 4 plus 3 is 12. 12 plus 3 is 15. This one checks out. So that is a solution. And your last solution, you add 2 to both sides. You end up with 4 times x minus 3/5 equals 32. Divide by 4. X minus 3 to the 3/5 equals 8. Take that to the 5/3 power. 5/3 power, you get x minus 3 equals 32. And add 3 to both sides. You end up with 35. Check your answer, plug 35 back in, and it does check out again. So that one is also a solution. Okay. All right, good work today, guys.